you join us today on Factory Bank in Ramsey in Cambridgeshire, one of the venues for this year's Winter League final, as it has been for the last 4 years. It's a little bit different to the other drains that we fish in the Winter League final, mainly because it's the downstream end of a river called the Berry Brook that runs all the way from near Huntingdon and actually carries quite a lot of water into the middle level system. Being a river, it only really flows in one direction. It might stop every now and then when there's no water around, and it can carry nice colour and this flow right through the winter when we get a wet winter. The last couple of years it's been pretty hard on here because we had cold winters with no rain, but this year we've had no lack of rain. The water table is full, and hopefully the drain will always carry a bit of flow and colour all the way to the final in a few weeks' time. The pegs at Factory Bank are starting at peg 1 to my right, just up by the river mill in Ramsey, and these are the widest pegs. Peg 1's about 11 metres wide, but the water flows under the tunnels under the town, comes out into peg 1, and there's a bit of movement under your feet, so often you can catch short. And the flow stays on the near side for about the first 6 or 7 pegs, and then gradually spreads across the drain, and by the time you're on the crash barrier, which is about peg 10, the flow's pretty much gone across the drains then. But on these lower numbers, there's often some fish close in. There's a little bit of extra depth sometimes on these first couple of pegs, and you can catch perch and small roach close. Then you have a middle line and then you go across. As you get to the crash barrier, the fishing really is down the middle and across, and it's about timing your match to go across. And all the way to the end of the section really, below the crash barrier, down towards what we call the armchair, which probably won't be in the Winter League final. It's all about fishing down the middle, being patient, and then going across at the right time in the match. The main methods on Factory Bank are squat and pinky. There are other methods that catch, but the main methods are squat and pinky, and you always start by feeding ground bait. The ground bait mix I use on here, generally speaking, is a canal type mix. We've tended to settle on the Census Super Black Gardons, Canal Fine Mature, and a bit of brown crumb in it, or a variation of that mix. You mix it fairly wet so that it gets to the bottom but breaks up, but it's still quite a fine mix. But really it's what I call a roachy mix on Factory Bank. It's a gritty mix rather than a soft skimmery type mix that you might use elsewhere as a mix for skimmers and hybrids that you sort of catch in places like March or at Benwick. So on Factory Bank you are targeting roach, although there's a lot of perch as well. Rigs for Factory Bank, again, you need a range. Down the middle it's only between 3.5 and 4 foot deep. So you're never going to fish big rigs, but you might be on 3/4 of a gram in order to get down quickly when you're on a red letter day when the roach are really having it. But as you can see today, it's hard to tell, but it's a bright, sunny, frosty day today. And I started on my normal sort of starting rig of 1/2 gram, and I've ended up on 0.1 now with a squat on the hook because we've had the first couple of frosts of the year, and the fish have definitely been affected by those frosts. But we're catching odd fish. So I always carry a range of rigs from 0.1 up to about 3/4 of a gram. And when it runs quite hard, if we've had a lot of rain, we also tend to use small flat floats on here, 1/2 gram, 3/4 of a gram, and hold back hard. And on those days you tend to feed more ground bait jammed with pinkies when it's running hard. Today we've got a little bit of flow, so I'm squat fishing today. The thing about fishing narrow drains is they are quite difficult to get right because you've not got a lot of room to get things wrong. You need to swap lines, you need to be fishing in different areas of your peg, and you also need to try and leave somewhere in your peg where you're not fishing, so the fish can back off. And it's really quite important on the small drains that you manage where you're fishing and you manage where your fish are so that you can prolong your catching spells. On other venues you've got more room, you can fish 2 or 3 lines, you can rotate lines. On here, yes, you can rotate lines, but you've got less room. Where I'm fishing now on peg 2 is about 8 or 9 metres wide. The widest peg 1 on my right is only 10 or 11 metres wide. And when we go down to the lower end of the drain on the crash barrier and just below, some of the pegs there are only 7.5 metres wide. And down there you have to be quite careful where you fish. You don't want to chase the fish out your peg too soon. It's a golden rule on the drains, is you need to leave somewhere where you're not fishing to give the fish a chance to back off and regroup, because the venues are quite small. So hopefully for the Winter League final, we'll keep getting a bit of rain. I think the water table's high enough that we will always have a bit of flow on Factory Bank, but the bit of rain keeps just a tinge of colour in the drain, and then it will fish well. You want a stable period of weather. Sudden changes like we've had this weekend, from very low pressure to very high pressure in a few days, really does affect the shallow drains. Especially March. Places at March this weekend on a match were really hard, and today it's been quite tough really to catch. But if you get a stable period of weather with a bit of rain and a stable barometer for several days, then these drains will fish really well. Float wise, I use slim floats for the lighter weights, so I'm using a slim sort of what we might call a Chianti body, or slightly fatter, that's made by a friend of mine for the 0.1 fishing. And I use a small colmic float called a Cavato, but it's a round-bodied rugby ball shaped body float that allows you to hold back and to work your rig through here. I also set up a couple of whips, normally 4.5 metres, but on these low numbers there's a bit of flow under your feet, so you set up a short whip as well for perch. And on those I'll have normally 2 4-metre whips, one with a 0.8 of a gram rig and one with about 0.3 or 0.4 for fishing through the water. It's quite simple. A few other things with places like Factory Bank. The banks are quite steep. You often need a platform. I've got in the edge with a platform here, or you can do it with your box. But one tip is, when you're really catching and you want to, say, leave your number 4 on when you're catching roach quickly, if you're too low to the water with this steep bank behind you, it's quite hard to lift your fish out. I always find you need to give a little bit of room behind you, so you're better sitting slightly higher. It's a bit counterintuitive. A lot of people like to get in really low. I don't. I prefer to be slightly higher to allow me more room to manoeuvre my pole around me, and it's easier to ship up the steep banks. Personal preference, but to me, positioning the roller as it is allows me to use a roller, but when I'm catching really quickly and sliding a section through my hands, I need room behind me so I don't keep hitting the bank, because it is quite steep. You park behind all the pegs here, so you can really leave most of your kit in the car to save it getting muddied down the bank. It can be a bit muddy. All the fen drains are the same. Unfortunately, it's not like commercials where you get nice clean banks. Be prepared to get a bit muddy when you come to the fens. But the fishing normally compensates for that. Just need to get yourself a jet wash for when you get home. So, Factory Bank. It has been hard. There's been some complaints about the venue the last couple of years, and that's because of the type of winter we've had. I think this year, I'm pretty sure that given the stable conditions and the way we've had the rain and the amount of colour in the venue, this will settle down and it will be a decent little match on here. For the first 2 years of the Winter League final, Des Ship and Alan Scottorn both won their sections on here, and they're quality anglers who got to grips with how to fish a venue of this type. Well worth a visit, quite an interesting little venue, and full of roach like that.